Hello, everyone. My name is Brendan Marr. That noise you're hearing is my ventilator. Welcome to the last Acolyte analysis presented by Page Turners. They were not nice Star Wars podcast. This is the last episode of the Acolyte analysis until we get another season of the Acolyte, which I believe will happen, and I certainly hope does happen. We have reached the 8th episode of the Acolyte, called The Acolyte. Mm-hmm. And a lot of things come to a head here. There are certainly a few things that are left to be answered later. Like, I want to know where Mother Coral is. Is she out there causing trouble? I have a theory that Kynir is somehow connected to the witches. I'll just call him Kynir because I know he claims he doesn't have a name. It says I don't really have a name. I'll just call him Kynir for simplicity. I think that he's got some connection with the witches. And I think Mother Coral is out there somewhere, I think. Um, I do want to talk about the elephant in the room. We get a glimpse of what looks like Darth Plagueis. To those who may not know what I'm talking about, in Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, Palpatine tells Anakin a Sith legend about a guy called Darth Plagueis, who was extremely powerful and knew how to create life using the Force. Well, we learn in other material that Darth Plagueis is not a Sith legend. He's Palpatine's own master. And we see him in this episode peeking around the corner as Osha and Kynir leave the planet, the ocean planet that they're on. One thing I just realized, and I just thought, where we see that the witches create life. And we know that Soul and the other Jedi are fascinated by the virgins in the Force. Apparently, the creation of the twins is a virgins in the Force, they think, or something to that effect. So this seems like this bit of information is extremely important, at least to Master Soul. But one thing that I thought is, did Darth Plagueis teach the witches? Did Darth Plagueis teach Anastasia or Coral about how to create life? And now we know not just create life, but do some really weird things in it with it in terms of splitting a soul, splitting someone's soul, splitting a person in two, basically, and creating two beings that are the same soul. Um, possibly a dyad or something like that. So I wanted to mention that we got an appearance of Plagueis in this episode, which makes sense given the timeline. Now, because he's there, I'm assuming that he's the guy who taught Kynir. But it's also possible that he's just following Kynir. Anyhow, we'll see where that goes. I'm interested to know. The other big thing that happens in this episode, as a lot of people predicted, is that the murders got pinned on Master Soul. We'll get to his death in a minute, but the a lot of people predicted that would happen, and it's so interesting because Vernestra is a fan favorite character from the High Republic books, and seeing her like this is very interesting and very uncomfortable in a way because she's become very political as a Jedi. And I don't mean politics. I mean that she is knows how the game is played. And because Senator Rainford is really wanting to interfere with the Jedi, clearly he doesn't like the Jedi. So um, his internal review of the Jedi, or whatever he wants to do, clearly he is not. This is not an impartial examination. The external review. This is not a impersonal review. This is a personal attack on the Jedi. Raincourt, I don't think he wants to, just take a look and make sure everything's good. He has an agenda, I think. And so it would not be impartial, it would be very biased. And Vernestra realizes this cannot happen. Because if it happens, the Jedi will be losing the ability to do the right thing. Because as we have seen in real life, you cannot trust politicians and senators and representatives to do the right thing. Some of them, yes, but others no. And the idea of the Jedi, who are already kind of flawed, being in the hands of a flawed, divided political system, it only weakens the Jedi more. And as we see, they get more and more weakened to the point of their defeat later. So Vernestra knows how the game is played. So unfortunately, Soul has to be the scapegoat. Soul is already dead. Vernestra has to pin it on him. The idea actually comes from her Padawan, Nog Adana. He's the one who suggested that Soul might be guilty. She said that's quite an accusation. I think that was in the fourth episode, I believe. So that's the idea she's going with. Now she is aware that her former Padawan, Kymir, who was once her Padawan and then turned evil, she knows he's out there and she wants to find him. I don't know if that scar on his back came from her her lightsaber whip. But clearly they had a falling out. Vernestra knows that he's involved somehow. But I think this is something that she does not want to get out. The reason she has to blame Soul for it is to stop Senator Raincourt from getting involved in the Jedi's affairs. I have a feeling that he's going to keep pushing. That he's going to keep pushing and pushing this agenda in probably the next season. But the best that Vernestra could do is say, it was one of their own Jedi. He turned bad. We took care of it. No problem. Instead of saying, oh, by the way, there's a dark side warrior who used to be my student, and because that would admit, well, I don't think Vernestra is being selfish, but that would admit her own failure. But also, it would admit that the Jedi are unable to stop a dark side group from showing up. That would make them look extremely foolish. Because their job is to maintain balance, and the Darksiders are the opposite of balance. So admitting the truth, the full truth, would make the Jedi look bad and would justify the Senator's agenda. So Bernestra had to make a hard call. And she apologizes to Soul that she has to do that. So Bernestra, unfortunately, has become political because the Jedi now have to maneuver in the divisive, messy, conniving political system of the government. Did she make the right decision? Well, as with so many things in the show, it all depends on your point of view. We then get, finally everything comes to a head on Brindok in the witch's old fortress, the mining facility. I figured it probably everything would come to a head here. Saul finally admits fully that he killed Anasaira. Now, Saul is very insistent throughout the entire episode that he did the right thing. Did he do the right thing? I don't really know. I don't really know, and that's a debate for another time. In some ways, yes, in other ways, no. But I have to think about that. He admits what he did, that he killed Anasara. Osha hears this. And Osha, who we see has struggled to use the Force, finally uses it to choke Soul to death. And she kills him. Right before he dies, Soul says, "It's okay." When Mother Anasera was killed by Soul, she had a similar reaction. She was not angry. Soul dies without any anger toward Ocean or Anae. And he was about to admit that he loved them, but he was cut short. And the last words he says are, "It's okay." This is like when Han Solo dies. When Kylo Ren stabs his lightsaber through his father's abdomen, what does Han do? He reaches his hand out and touches his son's cheek affectionately. He still was his son even in that moment. Soul still was Osha even in that moment. And so my favorite guy, Soul, is dead. Now, first I gotta say, Lee Jung Jae, in my opinion, has given the best performance of this show. Absolutely astounding, I think. And he's still my favorite character of this series. Warts and all. I think that Vernestra hits the nail on the head when she says that Soul was a kind, brilliant, and compassionate man who made a bad choice. And he did something wrong. Now, when Vernestra says it, the thing that he did wrong is to kill the other Jedi. That's her in her cover story. But if you look at it in terms of what he actually did, like I said, did he do a bad thing by getting involved with the witches when the girls were little? Uh, Arguably he did. And so what Bernestra is saying is that Soul is brilliant, kind, compassionate, and he did something wrong. And the reason why I find it a powerful statement is the use of the word "and." She did not say, "but he did something wrong." She said, "and he did something wrong." We are not defined by, it's not a zero-sum game with we as people. We are not, I'm trying to think of how best to phrase this, but we are not an all or nothing people. Let me give you an example of what I mean. George Washington, the father of this country. George Washington was a great leader, a brilliant strategist, possibly the greatest president we had ever had. And he was a slave owner and did not have good relations with the Native Americans. Now, the reason I mention this is I use the word "and" because he was all of those things: a slave owner and a great leader. It's not George Washington was a great leader, but he owned slaves. Unless you have to say with the word "but" that being a slave owner defines his entire legacy. The reason I prefer the word "and" is because he is all of those things. So how does that apply to you and me? We are all of what we are, the good and the bad. It's all of who we are. And I think it's best for us to embrace that and embrace the fact that we are a sum total. We are a total of what we are. The good and the bad, the right and the wrong. It's not that Saul was a good Jedi, but he made a bad decision. Because the word "but" almost negates everything that comes before it. There's a line from Ned Stark on Game of Thrones, which is everything you say before "but" is bull. I can't repeat what he says. Is bull. So what we are is we are not one or the other. Bull is not one or the other. Soul is not just a great compassionate Yoda. Neither is he just a guy who made a huge mistake. He is all of those things. And I like that Vernestra says that because I think this show has demonstrated that the characters are all of what they are instead of being one or the other. There's a lot of moral uh, uncertainty in this show because I think it deals with the fact that in human nature, we are all what we are. And these characters, as we see, have gone left, right, and sideways in terms of where they begin in the story and where they end. They go all over the place in terms of their morality. And that I think is a fascinating examination of the fact that we are not one or the other. We're not good or bad. We're both. And accepting that that's part of who these characters are. Just a few things as we wrap up, because there's so much to talk about with this episode. But there's only a few things that really I wanted to talk about. The other thing is we finally get to see how a red lightsaber comes to be. Now, this has been demonstrated in the comics and in the novels. This is the first time we've actually seen it. A Darksider takes a Jedi's crystal, and by using the dark side of the Force, bleeds the crystal, and it becomes red. And I love the symbolism because Osha is embracing the dark side. And the lightsaber turning red is a physical manifestation. Now, it's interesting that it happens to be Soul's lightsaber, if I'm not mistaken. That's an interesting little detail as well. Almost as if to say, you made me what I am. So we get to see that. That was really neat. The other thing we get to see is the whole bit with Pip, the droid. The reprogramming of Pip that occurred earlier in the season, where May basically reprogrammed him to be her droid instead of Osha's droid, is, I think, a metaphor for the fact that you can change your nature for good or bad. We have seen this in recent live action Star Wars. The theme of you can choose who you are. You are not defined by your programming. To quote the movie Brave, you can change your fate. So the whole idea of characters that are programmed could be one way, learning to become something else. Mando and Mandalorian had to deal with this. But particularly in this show, both girls, Nay and Osha, are able to choose who they want to be. They are able to be reprogrammed or deprogrammed and able to, in many ways, start again or choose to be something else. They finally let Osha choose. Because when they were kids, May was so insistent that Osha do what she wanted. Having this final moment at the tree, saying, Osha, what do you want to do? That was beautiful because Osha really didn't get much of a choice when she was younger. I think Pip is emblematic, is allegorical to the girls basically being able to reprogram themselves. And in the case of resetting Pip, basically the factory settings. That's exactly what happens to May. May's memory is wiped and she is reset. She can decide for herself what she wants to be. And this episode is called The Acolyte because Osha chooses to be the Acolyte. To Kanya. This is the origin story of a villain. And we certainly see that with Anakin Skywalker. but it's very unique for Star Wars to basically have a villain origin story. Now we know that Vernestra wants to find Chimera. She thinks the case is closed with the Senate. I have a feeling that the case is closed for now, but then there comes a time where it's revealed that what she told the Senate was false, giving Senator Raincourt the ability to finally push external review, which I think will only bring detriment to the Jedi. Um, I am hoping that we get another season. I think we will. And I am very excited to see where the story goes. And the final thing I wanted to say as I conclude, what is Vernestra going to tell Yoda? She meets him at the end and says, "We need to talk." What is she going to tell him? Is she going to tell him the entire truth? And if so, what does Yoda do with that information? Does that play into him in the prequels, in the prequel trilogy? When he says, "Hard to see the dark side is." He is not as skeptical when Qui-Gon says, "I faced the Sith Lord." Mace Windu and Coyote Lindy are like, "No way." And Yoda says, "Hard to see the dark side is." Maybe what Vernestra tells him is going to inform that attitude. I have thoroughly enjoyed this season of Acolyte. It has been maybe the most ethically uncertain, or not uncertain, but asks a lot of moral and ethical questions. Not very, most of the characters are not 100% right and not 100% wrong. There's really that sense, as I mentioned earlier, of we're not one way or the other. We are all of what we are. And the show is morally maybe the most complex that we've ever had in Star Wars, leading us to ask some big questions. Now, who did right? Who did wrong? Could it have been avoided? The truth being withheld is never a good thing. So it's been a fascinating journey. Love seeing more Jedi in this time period. Lots of twists and turns. You never know which way the story was going to take you. And also very colorful galaxy that we got to see. I'm very hopeful that they will keep going with this show. I think they will. Leslie Hudson did a great job, and so did all the others who worked with her to bring this to life. And those are my thoughts on The Acolyte Season 1, Episode 8, The Acolyte. Let me know what you think. My name is Brennan Miller. That noise you're hearing is my ventilator. You can follow me on X at Brennan Mystical. You can also follow this podcast on X at Page Turners _ pod. And Page Turners, they were not on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify. Thank you for tuning in to the last Acolyte analysis, at least for a while. May the Force be with you.